As Jennifer and I were walking in, I know you all now know her from having seen Misrepresentation, and we had some great conversations with people. Go ahead and clap. I've been teasing her and saying that if she had a fan club, I wanted to be the president, because I do shoot for the top, as many of you should as well. But let me again just welcome you to the leadership salons that are sponsored by the Women's College of the University of Denver in support of and in recognition of the presidential debate that the university is hosting on October 3rd. I can't wait for the day when one of those debates has a woman as a candidate. But until that time, we are honored to be the first debate of the presidential election season. And as such, each of the academic units are stepping up and bringing the great issues of the day to the forefront in preparation for the debate. Our mission at the Women's College, of course, is to educate women to be bold leaders, to lead in the communities where they live, where they work, and where they engage. And we know that in this century, there are no longer just women's issues. There are issues of importance to all of us. And certainly, I think in the film, Jennifer did a fabulous job of talking about not just how girls and women are impacted by these images, but also how they impact boys and men, and how together we can really make a difference. Jennifer Siebel Newsom is a filmmaker, actress, speaker, and advocate for women and girls, and an all-around, may I tell you, really super nice person. She wrote, directed, and produced this 2011 documentary that was premiered at Sundance, Misrepresentation, which, as you've seen, explores how the media's misrepresentations of women contribute to the underrepresentation of women in positions of power and influence. Also, which is part of the movie, launching the campaign, misrepresentation.org, a call to action campaign that gives women and girls tools to realize their full potential. And those of you who heard me introduce the film know that I'm part of that virtual community, receive the emails, the calls to action. I encourage all of you to sign up because I welcome the weekly reminder of what it is that I need to look out for. Jennifer Siebel Newsom graduated with honors, no surprise, both from Stanford University and Stanford's Graduate School of Business. You have her more detailed bio in front of you. I won't go into that detail because you can read that for yourself. Please help me in welcoming Jennifer Siebel Newsom. Look at this fan club. I have something to be president of by that. Jennifer, would you please first share with us your story? What inspired you to create this powerful documentary?
So, as I talk about in the film, I knew I wanted to have children someday, and I was in Hollywood at the time that the tabloid junk food culture was really taking off, and Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, they were all tabloid fodder. And I couldn't imagine raising a child, and a young girl in particular, in a climate that's so demeaned, objectified, and limited women. And met my husband and was introduced to all these incredible women in the political sphere, from Condoleezza Rice to Nancy Pelosi, former now Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, and thought, you know, there's a real disconnect between the media and women in the real world. And I started to look at the facts, started to make the connections that you see in the film. But on a deeper, more personal note, I didn't want any young woman beyond my daughter, including my daughter, to suffer in some of the ways that I suffered. And much to what Dr. Carolyn Heldman says in the documentary, I wanted to ensure that girls realized their potential and didn't get stuck or trapped in being victims or in self-objectifying, mostly because we need you all. we need you to participate in the larger conversation, in the larger national conversations that are going on right now that are not only harming women and families, but they're harming our country. And so if we're stuck and we're so focused on being victims or self-objectifying, we're not able to actually contribute and use our voices. And that's why I made Ms. Rep.
You know, in the film, I think it's very powerful the way you talk about your own journey. And what was that moment for you where the light bulb went on and you realized that you didn't have to buy into those images for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Probably a couple of light bulbs.
I mean, so many. I mean, I think life experience. I mean, I do think making the film gave me a voice. I think when I was in my late teens, my god sister said to me, "You're being selfish." And she didn't know what I'd been through, but it didn't matter. I was still being selfish. Like, forget why I was being selfish. I was being selfish. And that struck me, and that was interesting. And I went through a period where, you know, when I was in Hollywood, so many talented, bright, creative women around me were kind of looking to me for leadership in some way, and they were so insecure, and it drove me nuts. And I was like, I don't want to be that person. I do not want to be that person. And I think it was a frustration with hearing everybody kind of complain and gripe and just not wanting to be a victim.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because, you know, as we look at this upcoming presidential debate and the election, and we look at the numbers of women who are stepping up and saying, mm-hmm. you know, I do want to step up into that leadership role. The challenge still is that so many, I think we have this perception that women have made it.
Right.
And because we see so many women in the pipeline, so many women, I often say that women are, in fact, running most of the higher education institutions in the country, not because they're the presidents or the chancellors, but because they're the assistants and the associates and they're the staff people, and this machine is running every day mm-hmm. with lots of women behind it, and the custodial staff. But yet, when we look at positional leadership, only 18% of positional leadership across the sector is held by women. And in politics, it's a little scarier. The Center for the American Women in Politics reports that only 16.8% of Congress is comprised of women. 16.8%. Mm-hmm. Women hold only 22.7% of statewide elected positions and 23.7% of state legislatures, with these last two numbers decreasing in recent years. And the thing, and I said this in a talk I gave out in California last week, that there was only one woman of color who's ever served in the U.S. Senate, Carol Moseley Braun, who served from 1993 to 1996. Mm-hmm. So here you are in this observation where you see women who are thinking about who they are in the world and whether or not they're stepping up for leadership positions. We have women who are stepping up for leadership positions, and yet the media is giving us an entirely different message.
Right.
It's telling us we're not powerful, we're not smart, all of these messages. So as you worked with the film, tell me how you think the portrayals of women in the media plays a particular role in looking at women in elected office. Like, how is it that the media shapes both our capacity to see women as leaders
right.
and women to see themselves as leaders?
Right. So it's the whole concept. I'm quoting Marian Wright Edelman, but if you can see it, you can be it. Or if you can't see it, you can't be it. Right? We talked about that a little bit. And I do feel like if the media is celebrating, we were just at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and the media was celebrating the Kardashian family and Lindsay Lohan. And I didn't say this, but people at my table said, Mrs. Kardashian's a pimp, Kim Kardashian's a porn star, and Lindsay Lohan's a felon. And I don't mean to be that brutal, and frankly, I'm uncomfortable because I'm talking about women, and I don't want to talk about women in that light. But at the end of the day, because really it's the economics, and it's Ryan Seacrest, and it's all those people that are behind the Kardashian family's TV show. But if our media is celebrating these women and putting these women up there as this is who women are, that's the message that our kids are getting, both our girls and our boys, and therefore, and they're not getting the opposite, which is intelligent women, which is more about all of the incredible women that are either in leadership or aspiring towards leadership. I mean, just that one stat in the documentary where former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, for her first 4 years, she was on the cover of 0 national magazines. And in current Speaker Boehner's first 4 weeks, he was on the cover of 5 national magazines. I mean, in some sense, that kind of says it all to me.
I remember when I saw that part of the film, and I gasped because,
Right.
because there was so much press about Nancy Pelosi.
Right.
And whether you agree with her politics or not.
Exactly.
She was the first Speaker of the House who was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And the vitriol that was spread across news about her was extraordinary. And so, quite frankly, I just assumed that she had been on magazine covers.
Right.
But that was shocking to me.
Right.
0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is a question from the audience, and I think it actually ties into some of your observations at the White House dinner that you attended. And the question is, how can you get powerful women like Angelina Jolie and Madonna to change their image in order to change the young women of the world? And I think this speaks to, the celebrity, the very carefully constructed, airbrushed image that, quite frankly, none of us can live up to.
Right. So, a couple things. We need more women behind the scenes, because if you have, right now we're 3% of media positions of clout, less than 10% of writers and directors in the top grossing studio films. If we had a tipping point of 30% women behind the scenes, you would see a very different media landscape. You wouldn't obsess over the Kardashians and even Angelina Jolie's sexiness. You would actually be talking about Angelina Jolie's activism or her work with the UN and her work in other countries. The whole kind of, remember the Ashley Judd piece? Those of you that read the wonderful piece that Ashley Judd wrote in response to media, not only comments, but were just negative media that basically focused on her aesthetics and what they called her chubby face or chubby cheeks or whatever they did to her. Rather than saying, wow, she's actually one of the smartest women in Hollywood, she's done incredible work overseas. She's an activist for causes for women and girls, HIV, abuse, et cetera, we focused on the way she looked. So I think if we had more women behind the scenes, I think you'd see, and hopefully up to at least 50% women, but let's just get to the tipping point of 30%, you'll transform the media culture. We're hosting a screening. Reese Witherspoon loved the film. She saw it many times. And she's hosting a screening at CAA on Saturday that I'm going to be at. And this is the beginning of larger conversations in the industry, which I do think, because there's a scarcity of roles and because there are so many men that aren't conscious in positions of power and influence, I think there is this feeling that the women have to do something to differentiate themselves from the pack to get attention to actually, hold a job. It's one of the reasons you see, if you watch closely, and it's very disturbing to me, but if you watch closely and you see a lot of these cable shows where women are constantly taking their clothes off. It's always, but it's rarely, and actually, I want to say never, but it's rarely the lead female character. It's always a guest star or a subordinate female character. And as Reese says, these women don't have to do that. That's what you have lawyers for, but there's this feeling, and I know it because I was an actress, even though I didn't take my clothes off, but there's this sense that, you know, if I don't accept and sign that nudity clause, I'll lose the job and I won't have the career I want. So there's so much fear, and that's why I'm excited about this conversation that we're going to have with Reese and a bunch of thought leaders, female thought leaders in the space. And then we're going to continue it on with a salon in the summer that really is going to look at best practices and how we can get more women behind the scenes and how we can really remind all of the women in the industry and obviously all the men as well who are in positions of power that that they're role models, whether they choose to be one or not, and that a young girl or a young boy is watching them and that their actions are influencing this young person's behavior.
You know, thinking about who's behind the scene, who's taking the pictures, who's producing the films, you know, again, to bring it back a bit to the political arena, another point in the film where I gasped was the picture the photographer took when Sarah Palin was standing at the podium.
Right.
And it was from behind her, through her legs, with these young boys looking up at her. You know, and here was someone who was, you know, a very serious vice presidential candidate and who was objectified, quite frankly, from the get-go. And I don't know that there's a question in there, Jennifer, as much as like an observation about, like, would anyone have ever taken a picture between Joe Biden's legs?
Right, no, exactly.
Probably not.
Exactly, there you go. And, you know, for those of you that watched the HBO Game Changer, again, whether you like Sarah Palin or not, I was disturbed because I felt like it was such a boys' club, including the women that were part of it, that they all they set her up for failure, and they totally, at the end of the day, you know, ganged up on her. And, you know, do I think, I mean, I don't want to get into politics here, but do I think she's been a disservice in certain areas? Yes. Do I think she's been a gift in other areas because she's inspired young girls to see that they can be that, and she's sparked this national conversation? Yes. So I think she's a mixed bag, but I do feel like at the end of the day, it was so easy for them to kind of spit her out and blame her, when really I wonder, you know, there was a man who made a decision, there were a group of men that made a decision to choose, and they, you know, they're ultimately responsible, and yet it was so easy, and you saw that in the film, to make her the scapegoat, which is so typical, right? But again, if we have more women behind the scenes, this kind of stuff isn't going to happen.
Well, and I think that, you know, part of how we see some of the absurdity of the images is to think about, do we see men being photographed this way? Do we see men being depicted this way? And it's not to say that the average sitcom doesn't depict men and women in ways that I don't know how many of us on any given day can relate to. But I do think when you flip the lens and think about a man getting a picture between his legs, I mean, that just wouldn't happen in serious politics.
Well, okay, and then look at Vanity Fair, which claims to be serious journalism. This month, on the cover, well, maybe, I know I'm laughing, maybe it's not really serious journalism. Sometimes it's mean journalism, but it's, you have 4 female actresses in the top TV series, and the women are naked with a sheet over all 4 of them, with jewels and their hair all done. And I was so disturbed because I've become a fan of Claire Danes in Showtime's Homeland. And I was disturbed because, once again, can you imagine Brad Pitt and George Clooney on the cover of Vanity Fair under a sheet naked? No. It's like we always do it to the women and the girls. And so, you know, this is a larger conversation. You know, as consumers of media, we either not buy that media, we speak out, we write in to the editors, and we say, you know, this is ridiculous. You're shortchanging women and diminishing their talent and their power and their credibility by turning them into sex objects. Not all actresses are porn stars. Not all actresses are sex objects. I mean, it's really, we've gone backwards. We've gone backwards in so many ways.
Well, that's actually another question from the audience. Given this resurgence of challenging women's rights, coined the war on women, How do you suggest we hold the ground that has been gained and avoid slipping back and rehashing ridiculous debates that were laid to rest decades ago?
We have to join forces. Every woman and every man who cares about women, I hope that's all of you men, because women may be 51% of the population, but we give birth to 100% of the population. So you all have a woman, whether you're close with your mother or not, there should be some woman in your life that you care about. And look, at the end of the day, I really think we need to be more responsible to future generations, even if we don't have kids. You know, we're only on this planet for so long. And really, you know, what kind of how are we leaving it? You know, what kind of a world are we leaving for them? And so it's up to all of us to join forces and take action and use our voice, use our power as consumers, use our power as citizens. We have a campaign at misrepresentation.org with the 2012 campaign, which is nonpartisan, which is about getting behind women who are aspiring towards leadership in this 2012 election cycle. And if there isn't a woman, if there's a man, what is he doing for women? What is he doing for families? What is he doing for our children? What is he doing for the environment, education, healthcare, the economy? You've got to ask those questions, and you can't vote just blindly along party lines. You really have to, yeah. And then our Not Buying It campaign is really easy and fun to do. Anytime you see something sexist, you can be a part of that campaign. You can tweet it. You can write letters to the CEOs. As I was saying earlier, people are already affecting change. Corporate America and the media is untethered and has kind of gone down this path, a path that has made a lot of people very wealthy, but a path that that is harming our children. Let me just give you an example of just media, for example. In Silicon Valley, all the kind of giants behind, you know, and not just Silicon Valley, but in Hollywood, the giants sort of behind not only software and social media companies, but media companies. Their kids go to Waldorf schools, and for those of you that don't know about Waldorf schools don't allow children exposure to media until they're of a certain age. If then. Everything's... so these creators of media, of all the video games that are violent and sexualized, they don't actually allow their children to go to a school where their children are introduced to media because they know that the media is damaging. Like, you know this study, and we talked about this earlier, the more media, it's really the more TV, I think the study was, the more TV that boys and men consume, the more sexist they are in their attitudes and behaviors toward women and girls. The more TV women and girls watch, the less confidence they have, the less hope they have, the lower their self-esteem, the less hope they have for their future. So it's interesting that the creators of media, video games, news media, you know, they know it's bad for their kids, so their kids can't watch that, be exposed to it. But they're profiting off of the rest of our kids being exposed to that.
So you raise a really good point about men and boys. Mm-hmm. And certainly I think one of the powerful pieces of your film is the voices of men who say, you know, we have got to make a change. We have got to stop this. So what's really clear is that everyone is harmed. So how do we, as you travel, how are you engaging boys and men in the conversation, and what do we do to continue to engage them? I said earlier to a man who I was speaking to, I said, you know, it's important that we be in conversation with one another, that we be allies in this. So what do we do?
Yeah. So I've been really impressed from the moment we premiered at Sundance to, you know, last night there was a father who dragged his son. His son did not want to come to the screening. And the son and he were so grateful that they actually came to the screening. I've been so impressed with fathers, not just fathers of daughters, but fathers of sons coming up to me and saying how grateful they are for the film, but who are concerned about not only their children's future, but the future of our country. And I think at least we know that we're very focused right now on men of consciousness who just haven't quite connected the dots around how this is all damaging women and girls in particular. But also we're connecting in a strong way with fathers of daughters, and hopefully there will be more fathers of sons that engage. We are launching a father-daughter campaign. Our next film delves more into masculinity and how we're raising our boys. And I think that will speak to men in a way that moves things forward, and speak to boys in a way that moves things forward. We do have education curriculum available that's age-appropriate visuals for kindergarten through 3rd grade, 4th and 5th grade, middle school, and high school. So that's one way that schools are engaging boys in gendered media literacy, and it's critical. I also want you all to know that the DVD is available, so if you have sons, and if you're comfortable, maybe you're not comfortable showing them the whole film, but parts of the film, we also have a dinner discussion guide online, and we're developing, and it should be ready in the next few weeks with Common Sense Media, a peer piece, a peer guideline, a parent guideline, and a family guideline, so that you can have conversations with your kids about this subject matter. So these are all the ways that we're increasingly trying to engage boys and men. And one thing I just want to say to men in the room, or to you who want to communicate to men in your lives, we're all like, as I said earlier, we're all role models. We're all modeling for not only our kids but other kids or other younger people what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman. And I love just to talk about being the best version of yourself, but knowing that someone is watching you, and that your actions influence them, inspire them, and inform, especially with young brains that aren't quite formed yet, inform kind of what it is to be, a man or a woman. And so there is a role for every man in not only engaging with his daughter in a healthy way, but not using words like to his son, like you're a sissy if you cry, or you're running like a girl, not using derogatory words that devalue women in the household. And also it's so critical for men to, I believe, play a larger role in parenting and household care and management. I think once men engage in that way, will enable women to thrive in ways that are unimaginable.
And you also have, I believe I got an email that you're having a campaign as part of Father's Day.
Yes,
right?
yes.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a father-daughter PSA that we're working on that will probably be out in the early fall, and then we have a Father's Day video that I'm excited about, that hopefully will go viral, and that is from the perspective of kids celebrating dads who get it, dads who inspire them, and dads who support them, and dads who are the future of helping to make the world a better place for all of us.
I was really struck in the film seeing Jean Kilbourne. Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier, and I was telling Jennifer that back in the early 1980s, I used to do work in the state of New York to work with teachers and guidance counselors to talk to them about how do we create greater capacity for girls and boys to pursue whatever careers they choose, that we not necessarily limit them by what we perceive in terms of a stereotypical role for a woman or a stereotypical role for a man. And Jean Kilbourne's work was out in the early 80s, and to see her in your film in the 21st century is really pretty extraordinary. Why do you think things have gotten worse?
Right.
I mean, because they really have. I thought the things that Jean talked about in the 80s and some of the ads were horrific then.
Right.
But at the opening of your film, we really get a very visceral image of how things have gotten worse.
Yeah. So obviously we didn't pass the Equal Rights Amendment in 1980, right? And with media conglomeration and so few women behind the scenes, you've seen a media which has influenced our culture that's really kind of spoken to the lowest common denominator of what it is to be a woman. And obviously they've profited off of that. And reality TV is harming us in so many ways. I mean, I know there's some great reality TV shows and a lot of people are fans of American Idol and what have you. But even American Idol, just to kind of make you guys think about this when you're watching it, I mean, it's, you know, in our culture, just because it's so much a reflection of our culture, we all know that the guy's most likely going to win because women and girls vote in spades for the guy and aren't necessarily supporting the girl, even if she's a better singer, which I think in many cases the women are. So I'm not being, I've watched it enough to go, gosh, that woman's really talented, but why, you know, but he has a bigger fan club. So, so there's a lot going on here, and it's complex, and it's layered, and we talk about it a bit in the documentary. But there is obviously a woman in power seen as a negative thing. Women don't support each other enough. Whether it's the people in power that don't want to let go of their power, you know, it's very obvious, and Jackson Katz says this eloquently in the documentary, and I'm paraphrasing what he says, but, you know, as women have gained power in the real world, the media world has created imagery of women that limits women, that demeans women, that objectifies us. And so until we really, as Gloria Steinem says, we're too nice. We've been too nice for too long. You know, until we start really using our voices and owning our strength and power as women, and until more men really join in this conversation, and it's not just a conversation but demand change, we won't make progress and we'll keep going backwards. I think, though, that things are headed in the right direction, and I think that just because I've been all over the country, and even increasingly the world, people are speaking about the change that is needed and people are taking action. So I do have hope, but I feel like now is our chance. If we don't take advantage of this now, I mean, the media is out of control. And the problem is, right, as we talk about in the film, politicians are not going to go after the media companies. By the way, we have not screened in Washington, D.C. yet. Our other film, The Invisible War, I mean, we have screened, but everyone talks about having screenings. Literally, Valerie Jarrett promised to a crowd of like 100 women in Boston recently that she would give the film to the president and the first lady. Do you know how many times I've given the film to people to give to the president and the first lady? From Tina Chen in the Office on Women and Girls to, you know, Valerie Jarrett to Joe Biden's office. I share that because, and we're all working on the same thing, but everyone's sort of operating in silos. And unless we get organized, which is why we created misrepresentation.org, we noted that all these women organizations were operating in silos. And they weren't necessarily leveraging each other's best practices and unique strengths. And so we said, okay, we're going to actually, we gifted almost $300,000 to women's organizations, national women's and girls' organizations. And as a result, they recognized that they and we needed to work together. And while we don't have the means to keep doing that, we're going to work strategically in partnership, recognizing there's room for all of us, there's power in numbers, and that other organizations are better at certain things than we are. And so I think that's one of the reasons I feel like why I leave my kids at home and come out and speak. Because I know that the more people that are awake, whose consciousness is awakened, and the more people are willing to just take small action, which is if you go to misrepresentation.org and you take the pledge, it takes a few seconds to take the pledge, you'll get these weekly action alerts. And that will just, I promise you, it's gratifying. You feel like you've done something not only for yourself, but for the larger, and for not only all women, but for our country. And so the more we all do that individually, you know, it's that snowball effect, right? Where we'll ultimately see change.
And I follow you on Facebook and Twitter and follow the campaigns really regularly and retweet when there's an opportunity to do so. And I'm curious, of the things that have come up on the weekly alerts, do you have a story about one that actually we did it and we got someone to change?
Well, the problem is so many people are changing already that it's like I'm overwhelmed by it, and they're small actions. So it's everything from, I mean, we're renting in a small town right now, and I have a girlfriend who literally, like, everyone tells her all the time about what they're doing in their family and how they're changing their action, whether they've stopped buying Sports Illustrated magazine, or they've stopped watching reality TV shows, or they're not buying their daughters such girly, frilly little dresses, or they're engaged with their son in a way that discourages video games and violence and encourages, empathy and love. So that you're seeing constantly. I talked about earlier all the people that have written into CEOs. We were part of the Rush Limbaugh, pulling sponsors from Rush Limbaugh. We were part of, yes, we were part of fathers. I don't know how many people have unsubscribed to Sports Illustrated magazine, but a lot of fathers have, and the problem is it's like the largest magazine. It's the largest, that subscription is the February, subscription. So we're going to work on that issue. Yeah. We're a part of a stream of not only tweets but emails and letters and phone calls to Teleflora and GoDaddy.com. And what's interesting, during the Super Bowl campaign, do you remember those of you that have been following us, there was all this sexist, there are all these sexist commercials during Super Bowl, and yet women are like 60 or 70% of Super Bowl watchers, consumers. And the men that spoke out, the heterosexual men who who love football, saying your ads, disgust me, or your ads degrade my wife and my daughter, and have moved their service from GoDaddy.com. In fact, I think our campaign was so effective, and I got this recently, the story that employees actually left GoDaddy.com because they were so embarrassed to be working for such a sexist company. Now the company's still there, and that's one of the things we're doing we're a small organization, is we're trying to kind of figure out we're trying to organize in a way that we can actually put somebody out of business, if necessary, or allow you all to put somebody out of business, which really at the end of the day, it's kind of like someone has, we all have to do it. And we're just one last thing, just to, there were schools that started these. The school stuff is really cool because I've gone to schools where they've literally shut the entire school down for a day to screen the film, process it, and take action and come up with individual actions and then group actions. And they're little things, very simple things that, in one all-girls school in New Jersey, there's a little kind of note in every mirror, in every bathroom, reminding the girls that what they're seeing in the mirror is more likely a distorted reflection of what the media is communicating to them than who they really are. And so there are all these little subtle things that are shifting our consciousness and reawakening us all to a new way of being, to a new way of living, to a new way of valuing women, of valuing care, of valuing the feminine. And we even have media companies, I'm really excited about this, media companies that have screened the film multiple times who have now adopted some of our best practices, the gendered principles, which when my husband was mayor of San Francisco was a big initiative where in partnership with the Calvert Group, the San Francisco Commission on the Status of Women adopted these principles which basically enable companies to measure where they are on a scale in terms of valuing women in the workforce, and then to take steps to actually value women. And so we're seeing it in corporate America. We're seeing this change. So it's like the stories are, they're there. They come in all the time. I'm most proud of just the individual actions, though, because I think if we can, the other day someone told me that she bought her daughter, what is it called? Not some kind of plastic surgery.
Botox?
Yes, thank you. She bought her daughter Botox, and she was so mortified having seen the film, that she had a larger conversation with her daughter, and she was like, I'm never going to do that again, I just want you to know. But I thought that, I mean, that's so odd, right? But that's just, people are being awakened in a new way. My one story I love is, we talked about it earlier, but it's a woman who literally took her 4-year-old daughter to school every day, got off the bus, and having seen misrepresentation, sort of for the first time noticed this really pornographic ad. And she was so enraged, she called into Mayor Michael Bloomberg's office, and that ad was pulled down the next day. The next day. I mean, think about, Times Square. Think about walking through an airport and all the cover of those magazine stands, all the disgusting, sexualized, pornographic. I mean, it's the pornification of mainstream America. That's what's going on. I mean, it's out of control. I feel so sorry for our kids who have no time to be kids because they're just being fed all these images of sex and violence. And so all of you in this room, have the ability at your fingertips to make a phone call, to send an email, to, when it comes to media, to just attack the inboxes of the networks that are making these TV shows. And basically just use your voice and say, what you're doing is disgusting, it's degrading, it's dehumanizing. We don't have the family hour anymore. Isn't that, and it's really tragic. My husband watches the news all the time because he has to, he's in politics, and he's always like, fortunately someone watches, because I'm like, I can't help it, so I can't handle it, so most of the time I'm like, what happened today? But, so the TV's on, and I have a 2.5-year-old daughter and a 10-month-old son, and they're there playing or whatever, and they see those images, and it's not healthy. So we have to continue to use our voices and speak out, and the only way things are going to change is if we do. But we can do it, and honestly, it takes less than 5 minutes to write that letter. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at the change.
It would be actually nice to use the social media for good in that regard.
Yes.
Yeah. I was really struck in the film by the number of incredibly powerful women that you interviewed. Secretary Rice is a graduate of the University of Denver, and Secretary Albright's father is Joseph Corbell, for whom our international school is named.
Oh, right.
So we are really blessed to have affiliation with 2 of the 3 women who are Secretary of State. And when Secretary Rice was here, one of the things that I love about her presence today is she is much freer to speak, I think, about issues around girls and women. And when I heard her speak in Washington, D.C., she was really clear about how educating girls and women makes such a huge difference. I just wondered, sort of behind the scenes, as you interviewed these women who really belie those images that are in the media about girls and women. I mean, they expressed a bit of the outrage in the film, but can you talk a little bit more about conversations with them in terms of how they see themselves as role models and what they're trying to do?
Yeah, well, this is interesting. 2 things. One, to focus on Secretary Rice, she has this story that didn't make it into the film and is in a small little podcast that I don't believe we've released yet. We're releasing different pieces because we have so much great content. She talks about meeting with a leader from a country in the Middle East who is so from a culture that sees women as inferior, that he can't touch her, can't shake her hand, he can't look her in the eyes. But he is so excited for his granddaughter to meet her that he's like giddy. And because he knows, because he wants for his granddaughter to see Secretary Rice as inspiration for who she could be. So he wants a better world for his granddaughter, even though he can't quite accept that he could actually create that himself. And I found that really interesting. Rachel Maddow was real. I love her so much. She was she's just so refreshing. And she was like, you have to tell your story. Because actually, a lot of people said to me, a lot of women who were sort of like advising me in the beginning, who were in the film industry, whatever, were like, you don't want to tell your story. You're a white woman, therefore you're a privilege. You went to Stanford, you got an education, therefore you're especially a privilege. And I remember being so naive. I was like, well, they don't know where I live. Like, how do they know I'm a person of privilege? But it was literally like, I'm a white woman, educated, I'm a woman of privilege, and therefore I'm not empathetic. And they didn't know my story, and it was really, it was definitely hurtful, because I was like, well, I have a story that I think people can relate to at least one element of it in some way or another. And you have to frame this film. And she was like, you have to tell your story. And so she gave me courage to tell my story, even though it was, condensed and everything. And then he made me think about it, but there was something else that you asked that I wanted to kind of, it was more about, what do they think about themselves? So this is kind of interesting. So, and I love it because Pat Mitchell totally came clean with this. I love her. I love Pat Mitchell so much. She's amazing. She's been wonderful to me. And she was wonderful to me because she, like, when she sat down and talked with me, she was so busy. And she's such a busy, busy woman. I mean, she's changing the media landscape internationally. And she's such a supporter of women and girls. But she said, Jen, I really didn't know, I was really nervous. Like, I was like, I don't know if Jen's going to be able to pull this off. And she was so pleasantly surprised. And so I remember at the Sundance premiere, she hadn't seen it. She came to the premiere. She said, Jennifer, you actually framed the film in a way that people can actually see the issue for the first time for what it really is. And that moved me so much, because I really didn't have a lot of support from women in making this film. I was told, as we kind of discussed earlier, that we'd achieved parity in this country. Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin had run for the presidency and the vice presidency, so what was I complaining about? I was told that, the bigger issues were really issues related to women overseas, and that, why was I wasting their time even asking them for funding? I was even told, this film had been made before, and who was I to make this film? I didn't know anything, blah, blah, blah. It was very lonely. It was very lonely. So gratefully, I did create a village around me of support and people that were more experienced than me in making films. But at the end of the day, I really was alone, because I did. And I think that's sometimes okay. We have to kind of accept that. Like, now I feel like I'm not alone, and therefore I hope that you also, if you've been thinking these things or involved in some way in these issues, that you recognize you're not alone as well, and that we have each other, and that there's strength in numbers, and that we're not crazy, the system's crazy.
You talked earlier about, you open up the film talking about your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a really powerful moment, as any of us who are either parents ourselves or who work with young people. Mm-hmm. We so want the world for them to be that fabulous place. And so you have done this. You have had a daughter, and now you have a son, and you've talked about, that you're traveling around the country and for them.
Yes.
But there's this moment, and I actually blogged about this a little bit, especially I think after the woman, Sheryl Sandberg, I think, who is the COO of Facebook, talked about women and how we need to aspire to these senior leadership roles. And I think we all have our stories to tell, but I also think that some of us do have greater capacity than others to navigate that terrain.
Yes.
Right? Of being moms and having our careers. And you know, as I'm doing this study right now with a group of researchers, and we're looking at women aspiring to college and university presidencies. And one of the stereotypes that exists is that women are not in senior leadership roles because they choose to limit their own advancement. Yet, you know, as I look at this dilemma and I write about it, it's no surprise that the women's capacity for success and advancement increases. As that increases, it's the same time that she has to make this choice,
right,
if she has the privilege of that choice, right, to have children. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that that's not a really fair choice.
Right.
So as you think about this notion of advocating for change that allows us to be the whole people that we are, men and women, boys and girls, how do we navigate this way in which women are still in many ways expected to, by society, seeing this in and of themselves as an expectation, how do they navigate this false dichotomy of choice between work and family?
Mm-hmm. So I want to start with a little story, and then I'll delve more into specifics. So when my daughter Montana was born, she received many comments on her looks and lots of pink. And when my son Hunter was born a year and a half later, he received fewer comments on his looks, and I think he's quite handsome, lots of blue, and letters from the president and the vice president and the first and second lady welcoming him into the world, suggesting that the world was his oyster and that he was its pearl and that he could do and be anything. Now, of course, I was in shock and awe and so grateful to have letters from the White House, but I secretly wondered why the White House had not sent such letters to Montana. I mean, they're only a little over a year and a half apart. Then I opened yet another package for Hunter, and I discovered a blue T-shirt with lettering in large caps saying, "Future President." There you have it. So, Montana, our eldest, but also our girl, was not given the notion or idea that she too could be future president, that her opportunities in life were limitless. So right out of the womb, we teach our boys that they're our future leaders, while we teach our girls that their value lies in their youth, their beauty, and their sexuality. And it's all because, right, we're always commenting on the girls' looks, and we're always encouraging the boys to aspire. So that's where it starts, right? So in terms of women, you know, there may be some truth in us not aspiring because we're not taught that we can be that. So now that we're all aware that we need to teach each other that we can be that, what do we have to do? Well, we're the only industrialized country in the world without paid family leave. This is a big, big, big embarrassment and problem. The only industrialized country in the world without paid family leave. Everyone knows you can't be a working mom and have a full-fledged career without support. And I'm not just talking about the first few months of your child's life. We still have the pay gap. White women make 77 cents on the man's dollar. African American women make 63 cents. Latina women make 57 cents in the equivalent job. So, and in Wisconsin recently, they passed a bill so that women couldn't actually, you know about this, right? So that if you realize that your cohort, your male equivalent, is making more money than you have no rights, despite Lilly Ledbetter and the first bill that the president passed. So we have the pay gap. We're the only industrialized country without paid family leave. We actually pay working moms less money than we pay women who aren't moms. And we should know by now that if you actually paid stay-at-home mothers, you'd pay them $117,000 plus a year, which is a lot of money because it's a lot of work being a mom, right? Raising kids and taking care of the house. So we have to really, culturally, and we have to think about the impact of not valuing women. And I think that's where it has to start. And politically, we need to, as women and men who care about women and care about our daughters' futures, because by the way, we're lying to our daughters, and I'm sounding so brutal when I say this, but we're lying to our daughters if we tell them that they can be anything, if we don't actually fight for the policies and the structure, the institutional structure, that will enable them to be anything. Because 70% of women in the workforce are working moms. So, you know, the majority of women in the workforce are working moms. So, that said, we have a lot to do. I agree with what Sheryl Sandberg says when she says you have to, you know, don't leave before you leave. I think a lot of us do that in some sense. It does take a village, so we need to lean on each other. I wish we had the extended family. Some of us do, right, where you have extended family that can help. I think it's so critical that we, if we can, rely on whether it's extended family or community to help us if we're working, raise our kids. You know, but all these factors need to be taken into account if we're going to see more women in leadership and men in positions of power and authority need to mentor young girls, and we women need to learn to promote ourselves the way boys do. Because, quick story, and then just, I met with some young engineers, female engineers who are starting a toy company that's all about encouraging young girls into STEM. And it's really cool, and I'm so excited. And I was laughing because basically, and again, I'm generalizing, and I don't mean to tease my male business school colleagues, but my male business school colleagues would have written the business plan and done everything, raised all the funding, and the actual product would have sucked. But these girls were so determined. I mean, they weren't asking for money or anything. They were so determined on creating this product and testing this product and making sure this product was perfect before they actually asked anyone for money. And before they actually even wrote the business plan, because it had to, you know, it's just that in some ways summed it all up to me that we, I mean, we really do things the right way, but and I really admire that and respect that, but we also have to know that the world we're in is competitive, and so we have to be ready to go to bat.
Literally, because this is the 40th anniversary of Title IX. And one of the things that I think has begun to change the landscape for girls, particularly, is the capacity to participate in competitive sports. And that, you know, we've seen that make a change over and over again, which is really terrific. And I will tell you that just an hour and a half ago, I had a conversation with a young woman and said, you have to put yourself out there. You have to be the picture on the page also. And you have to be someone who, because if you wait for someone to notice you, you will get passed by.
Totally.
Right.
And just Devanshi Patel, the young Indian American girl in the documentary, she literally, I'm not kidding, and I'm a joke, I say this to her face, she literally like stalked me. She was like, I really want to work for you. And my assistant at the time, Claire, was like, this young girl, she's really sweet, but we can't handle it. And I said, no, she's this ambitious, we'll find something for her to do. And I think she even came to my house and helped me like move boxes. But I really admired her confidence and her passion and her drive, and I wanted to make it work. And so I tell people all the time, and sometimes it stresses me out because they keep emailing me, but I'm like, if I don't respond right away, email me again, because I'm just really busy and my inbox is flooded. Don't take it personally. We women especially, I think my husband does it too, but we women especially take rejection personally. But it's not rejection, it's just people are busy and they're distracted. So if you want something, go after it, and don't be afraid to, you know, in a very polite way, just make sure, I'm sorry I'm calling you again, or did you get my email, or just want to make sure you saw my email. I mean, that's how we get things done. That's the real world we're living in.
And that's what we encourage the women at the Women's College to do.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, those kinds of environments where, whether it's athletics or girls' schools or women's colleges, where women still have the opportunity to really understand the capacity that they have and to keep going for it, and to not hear no for an answer.
Yes.
Maybe no is just no, not right now.
Right.
And maybe yes soon, but you've got to keep.
Right.
You've got to keep doing it.
My husband always says, rather than taking no for what it is, just ask a better question.
Indeed. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. We are very honored again to have you here. Love the film. We'll keep showing it at the university. I told you the library purchased it, so many, many more viewings. But I want to thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll see you all online. Thanks so much.